Okay, so obeisance is how some people say it. Basically, it's when someone's obedient to or being a servant towards. It's not obedience. It calls her because it was responsive to her son. Well, she lived in the hillside. She definitely wasn't a chunker. Disobedience.
Must be rabbits in there.
Or be gossip. I don't think that's a term. I was going to say that would just call it a servant's weak servant.
I mean, I guess like an apple pie. You don't even come down. You don't report down the directed on the other side. You have to the right. Where they cut all those trees out. So it's back in there. House is back.
All right. Good morning, everybody. It's probably going to be a little bit of a lagging morning. People will come in eventually, more than likely for the morning worship. But hope everyone's had a good week. I had something to say and I forgot. I don't remember. I woke up at 5:30. I'm going to forget a lot of things today. It'll come to me later on. We're on lesson 8 in our lesson booklets. We're on page 64, and we're going to talk about David and Abigail. Last week we talked about David and Nabal and looked at some of the foolishness and his characteristic of Nabal, and David's response and some possibilities of how they know each other. But we're going to see an opposite character today. And I think in terms of doing character studies, it's really important for men to do studies on male characters so we know how we shouldn't act. But I think also it's good to evaluate women characters as well, to see how they handle situations. Because in a society, especially during this time, in a society where women were really put down and they were treated like garbage sometimes, Abigail is very wise, considering the things that happen, and especially in regards to how her husband views David. She doesn't share that same view. So in a way, we're going to see a woman who speaks her mind, but she's very humble about her approach, and she's very wise in how she handles the situation. But before we get into this class, David, if you can lead us in a prayer, and we'll begin. Okay, so we'll begin with the introduction. It's just going to give a couple of things, kind of introducing the character of Abigail. There's some really good things in this intro, and after we finish, I'll point your mind to a couple things as we go through this study.
Good is easiest to see when contrasted with evil. This is why Scripture frequently teaches by comparing one item or action to another. For example, wisdom and folly are often discussed together. Emphasizing one difference between the two concepts, Proverbs 10:14 states, Wise people store up knowledge, but the mouth of the foolish is near destruction. In other words, wise individuals listen and learn. Foolish individuals never stop talking. Another difference is revealed in Proverbs 21:20. There is a desirable treasure and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man squanders it. Whether this proverb is stressing the importance of frugality or simply rebuking wastefulness, the gap between the wise and foolish is vast. Perhaps the most memorable comparison between wise and foolish individuals is found in Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. In his conclusion, Jesus described the wise man's behavior and said, "Therefore, whoever hears these sayings of mine and does them, I will liken him to a wise man who built his house on the rock." Matthew 7:24. After noting how the wise man's house will withstand storms because of its foundations, Jesus continued, "But everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand." Verse 26. Unlike the wise man's house, which withstands storms, the foolish man's house falls. The point of this contrast is obvious. Wise individuals hear and apply Jesus' word to their lives. Foolish individuals refuse to listen or obey. In our lesson text, we find a stark contrast between wisdom and folly. In this instance, the two concepts are seen in the divergent actions of a husband and wife, Nabal and Abigail. Nabal, whose name means fool, selfishly refused to provide for David and his men. 1 Samuel 25:10-11. Abigail, however, went out of her way to give them abundant supplies. Because of her generosity and wise advice, David refrained from striking down Nabal and his household. Concerning Nabal and Abigail, Davis wrote, "A couple is a study in contrast." The writer himself puts it succinctly in verse 3b. Abigail has good sense and good looks, but Nabal is hard and nasty. Don't think our writer is being uncharitable toward Nabal. He's simply telling the truth. Nabal's servant, his enemy, and his wife all agree that the narrator has correctly assessed Nabal. Nabal's own words vindicate the writer's estimate. Importantly, Abigail is as wise as Nabal. Nabal is foolish. Her behavior is characterized by humility, generosity, and discretion.
Okay, so one of the things to pay attention to as we go through this is pay attention to, pay attention to the circumstance that's going on. If you've been insulted, I know guys were pretty hot-tempered sometimes. And someone insults us to our face, I mean, it's almost like we want to, I didn't see anything. It's almost like we just want to take care of the situation then and there. It's not necessarily the best course of action every time. And the focus of the lesson isn't so much on David's attitude towards Nabal, but it's Abigail dealing with a certain character who's offended David. And we're looking at how she does this intercession, so to speak, on behalf of her life, but she's more concerned about the lives of others that Nabal is putting into jeopardy. And we talked about at the end of class last week, Abigail kind of acts as this intercessor, so to speak, the same way that when the children of Israel built the golden calf, and God said, "I'm going to kill them all." And Moses said, "No," and he fell down on his face and he prayed and he said, "Lord, remember your promise you made to Abraham. You were going to make a great nation, and granted, these people are foolish, but if you're going to blot anybody's name from the book of life, blot my name." And God would say, "It's he who sins, his name shall be blotted out." So because Moses stood and interceded for the people, though they didn't necessarily realize they needed an intercessor, God accepted Moses' plea. He gave them conditions on how they could receive forgiveness for this. And it works the same way with Jesus. Jesus is pleading before the Father, "Father, please forgive them. Father, help them. Give them one more chance." It's that same mentality, and that's what Abigail is doing. Now, it mentions Nabal's name means foolish. Abigail's name, if you look at the word A-B, if you see that in a name, typically father is going to be associated with this. So with Nabal, even though it means fool, father of a fool, Abigail is father of joy, which I think in one sense, this is a very wise woman. I'm sure being a daughter, her father would be proud of her. but in the sense of eternal Father. I wonder if we too could be Abigail's, so to speak, in that we bring joy to the Father. So we're going to see how Abigail does this in the sense of tact. So we'll talk about that idea of how we use our words, when we need to use our words, and when it's best to just bite our tongue and keep on going. We'll see that through this lesson. So if you have your Bible open to 1 Samuel 25, we'll read verses 23 through 28. That's where our text is going to begin. And this is right after the part when David has received word back from his servants, and they said, Nabal said, no, I'm not giving you supplies. In fact, you're probably some runaway slave, and you're just claiming to be David, and lots of runaway slaves are about. Well, David doesn't like this. So, verse 23, it would say, Now when Abigail saw David, she dismounted quickly from the donkey, fell on her face before David, and bowed down to the ground. So she fell at his feet and said, On me, my lord, on me let this iniquity be. And please let your maidservant speak in your ears, and hear the word of your maidservant. Please let not my lord regard the scoundrel Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my lord whom you sent. Now therefore, my lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, since the Lord has held you back from coming to bloodshed and from avenging yourselves with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek harm for my lord be as Nabal. And now this present which your maidservant has brought to my lord, let it be given to the young men who follow my lord. Please forgive the trespasses of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make my lord an enduring house, because my lord fights the battles of the Lord, and evil is not found in you throughout your days.
Surely in vain I have protected all that this fellow has in wilderness, so that nothing is amiss of all that belongs to him. And he has repaid me with the good. May God do so, and will also the enemies of David. If I leave one male of all who belong to him on one life. Upon hearing David's intentions, Abigail dismounted quickly from the donkey, fell on her face before David, and bowed down to the ground, because it was astonishing to find the lady of the land prostrated on her face in obeisance to David. His army was stopped in his tracks. With the full attention of David and his men fixed upon her, Abigail addressed the future king. On me, my lord, on me let this iniquity be. And please let your maidservant speak in your ears. Hear the words of your maidservant. Please let not my lord regard this scoundrel Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my lord whom you sent. Rather than laying the blame solely at Nabal's feet, Abigail attempted to accept responsibility for what had happened. She then attributed David's restraint to the Lord's providence and declared, Now therefore, my lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, since the Lord has held you back from coming to bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hand, now then let your enemies and those who seek harm for my lord be as Nabal. Assessing Abigail's strategy, I will observe. Abigail has made it nearly impossible for David to extract his revenge on this beautiful and gifted woman. He is humbly and persuasively intervenes on behalf of her master's servants and herself. More importantly, she has reminded David of who he is and says his hand and stays his hand from unnecessary violence, preparing an important lesson that he will need in the future. As a legitimate anointed one, he must continue to live by faith and wait patiently for God's way and time. Abigail asked David to accept her offering and use it to provide for his followers. Having done so, she pleaded, Please forgive the trespasses of your maidservant, for the Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord fights the battles of the Lord, and evil is not found in you throughout the days. While begging David not to destroy the house of Nabal, she predicted it would be blessed with the enduring house.
Additionally, she described David as fighting the battles of the Lord and acting in an upright manner. The term evil is also translated wrongdoing. She has remarked such behavior is characteristic of David, but is inappropriate for the future king of Israel. The implication seems to be that Nabal's defensive response, while certainly wrong, is not worthy of death. The shedding of blood would be unwarranted and equally wrong. David seems to concur with this.
Okay, just a couple of things to pay attention to. If you look at verse 24, it's interesting, and see if you agree with this, with what Nabal has said and how he has kind of reproached David's image, so to speak. Do you think Abigail is right by saying, "On me, my Lord, let this iniquity be"? Basically saying, I want you to take the fault that's Nabal's, and I want you to put it on me.
What do you mean, is she right? I mean, she doesn't deserve it. But that's taking the blame for somebody else.
She's his wife.
Okay, further define that.
She's married to him.
Okay.
The
Define what you mean. I know that. I know that. Okay.
Her worthless.
So I've always thought that we're responsible for our spouses to some degree, or even maybe some mistakes they make in a true marriage. If you've got a loving, marriage, and we don't know what kind of relationship they had as a marriage, and so I think the spouse does bear some responsibility for a family's problems.
Someone look at Proverbs chapter 19. I agree with that. Proverbs 19 and verse 11. And we'll contemplate. It deals with this idea of what she's doing.
The discretion of a man deferreth his anger, and it is his glory to pass over a transgression.
True or false, and I guess this would work because probably everybody but me and Jacob probably have gone through this. When a child does something wrong, and it's or a relative or a brother or whoever, okay, well, when an individual does something wrong and it's worthy of punishment, should there always be some kind of physical punishment every single time to fit the crime of whatever's been done?
So you're saying you shouldn't accept responsibility for what you did?
I didn't say that.
You should be held accountable for what you do.
I mean, someone who has done something wrong towards you.
Oh,
Should it always be the case every single time that there will be punishment?
but
You mean
God's going
if
to show
somebody does
mercy as we
something
show
to
mercy.
you,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like you always say, make your question clear.
Okay. So, if it's a wise thing for someone, at least according to Proverbs 19, if it's a wise thing where if someone does you wrong, to the way it's phrased, overlook transgression, what does that mean?
I think it's towards
Yeah. Okay. 7 times 70, and it depends on what you mean by transgression.
But you're talking about mercy, and if you're overlooking something in that sense, I always think, well, they did it, we'll just kind of forget it. But I mean, showing mercy to someone is, something that we need to do, just like forgiving, or else God won't forgive or show mercy to us. But I think we still need to make people responsible and not overlook what they do.
Somebody makes you mad, it's, you don't show your anger, right then.
Mm-hmm.
Just think about it. I think that's,
Would that be overlooking transgression, or would that be pondering on the offense that they've done to you? Okay. You were going to say something, Philip?
When Jesus was hanging on the cross, he said, "Forgive them, for they know not what they do."
Okay,
His life.
yeah, all of this is going in the right direction. I believe it's when people don't realize what they're doing and the righteous do realize what's going on. It's not necessarily saying, God, I know you're not going to hold this sin accountable to them, but I know that they really don't understand based off of where they're coming from. They really don't understand what they're doing. That's what the proverb writer is saying. That's more than likely what Jesus was saying as well. And even in Acts chapter 2, Peter would say the same thing. You didn't know that you crucified the Lord and King. We'll talk about this morning in regards to godliness. Sometimes people just simply don't know. It doesn't mean that God's not going to hold them accountable to those sins. But in our approach to helping them come to understand that they are in the wrong, anger's not going to help them to see, oh, I'm wrong. But rather, and it talked about it a little bit, a soft answer turns away wrath. There's a time and a place for everything. And sometimes when someone does an offense towards you, that's not the time for immediate, hey, let's talk about this. But the problem is there. So I'm not saying overlook sin per se, but sometimes there's a better time to address it than just right then and there. And just like you said, it's situational. It depends by what you mean. If it calls for, okay, this needs to be addressed now, then we've got to be wise in doing that. If we can wait a little bit to see how things play out and find a better opportunity, then there's that. I think that's what Abigail is doing. And when you look at the result from this was most definitely the time to address this problem to David, not in front of Nabal, because you're going to find out here in a moment that he really didn't care. And when she comes back and sees him feasting and everything, she waits until morning light when he's not drunk so he can realize what he's done and who he put in jeopardy. And we'll see the consequences for that a little bit later on. I think so, yeah. And I think there's a powerful lesson. It goes back to the intercessor idea. If nobody would stand up for the city of Rogersville except for one righteous individual and would just say, God, I know they don't realize what they're doing. They say they love you, but it's not according to your righteousness. God, just give them a little bit of time. Help me to have the courage, the strength, the willingness to stand up and do what's right, to give them and show them the right way in time. I think that's that same concept. Standing before the one who can give judgment and saying, just a little bit longer, remember your mercy and your grace and your greatness. And we'll have a lesson here in a little while about certain kind of prayers. We don't pray the same way people in the Bible do. And I don't want to use the word problematic, but when I start looking at my prayer life and I look at how they pray, I'm like, man, I need to change some of the words I'm using, because I do need to, when I'm praying, I need to say, God, you're gracious and you're merciful and your loving kindness is seen every day. And God, there's a lot of things that we overlook because we're thinking what we normally pray and how we normally think through the day. Hold on. Who made the last comment? I forgot where I was going with that. I don't remember. Oh, okay. So I was like, what? Where was I going? But yeah, that's the idea. We need to be looking for those people who simply don't know any better, but they think they're in the right. But we've got to figure out a way, just like Abigail. We've got to figure out a way to work with those people, maybe not immediately addressing them, but we've got to be able to lead them to the truth, whether or not they're going to accept it or not. We've got to be tactful about it. So sometimes, and pretty much every time, intercessor every time is preventing something happening to someone else, to someone who definitely knows more about the situation, can do more about the situation, and it appeases them. And when you see the form, or at least the image of Abigail here, it said verse 23, she saw David. She dismounted quickly from the donkey, fell on her face before David, and bowed down to the ground. You know, this is almost a similar idea to the prodigal son idea. When the father saw the son, he went running, and then he fell on his neck and kissed him, and the son was saying, Father, forgive me. Well, in that sense, it was someone who knew they did wrong, and they were trying to come back. In this sense, this is someone who knows that someone has done wrong. They immediately go to bat for that person by saying, God, have mercy on them. Or in this case, David, have mercy on the rest of the servants. Nabal is dumb. He's just, look at his name. That's what he is. Please, don't kill everybody else on his behalf. It's interesting if you try to parallel that with the Egypt or the Exodus story. I think there's some cool lessons you can come out there. We're not going to talk about that now, but it's an interesting study. If you think about, well, why didn't God do something here? I think it was different circumstances and different things to take into consideration. So any thoughts on that?
I disagree.
Oh, okay. Which part?
Maybe it was dumb. You said he was dumb. I think he was foolish in things he did and put his earthly mind on riches and fame. But he wasn't dumb because he married Abigail. He married a woman that was pure, really good, pure type woman at that time. So he was smart enough to marry a good woman. Which,
Oh, okay, let me rephrase. Okay, so I don't want to say, because I promised parents I wouldn't say certain words, so I've got to use other words in place of them. Dumb is probably not the best word to use, but I agree with you. He was a very smart man. He was just very arrogant with what he knew.
one thing I'll bring out, in that first commentary that Virginia read, and that the writer of this book here said on that page 65, about a third of the way down, it said, because of her generosity and wise advice, David refrained from striking down Nabal. But verse 26 of this, our lesson says, the Lord hath withholden thee from coming to shed blood, from avenging thyself. Is that, did God withhold him? Or did?
Is that the next section?
The commentary says,
Okay.
refrained him, but it says the Lord refrained.
So I think, okay, so I think he's talking ahead of time with this. It's the idea of what does God teach? Because one of the things I was looking at from David's perspective, but also what Jesus would teach, David makes the statement that Nabal is repaying me evil for good. And then I'm thinking of what Jesus said, don't repay evil for evil, but rather repay good for evil. I think David was simply acting out of anger, but you have thoughts on that same line?
Yeah.
Where was I going with that? I think it was because of what David had been taught about God and how he should treat his enemies, even though there are oppressors. The idea the Lord prevented, God has taught you, don't do evil for evil, but rather he's taught you to be generous towards them. Now, you'd have to look at the old law to find those particular principles because it's a little different than the Sermon on the Mount. But I think that's the idea, that the commentator is saying, Abigail brought this to David's mind. And Abigail is saying, even the Lord has prevented you from doing this by saying, you know what the law is made for. It's to protect people, and even those people who don't know any better. I think that's Romans 14, those who are strong in the faith. It's not explained that way in the Old Testament, but I think it's that same principle carried over. So I think there's information there that's not stated, but I think Abigail's bringing back to David's mind, you know what God teaches, and God, in a sense, is preventing you from doing this.
She reminded him not to do so from the evil way.
Yeah, she did that too.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, David's going on his emotions and anger, and it can cause you to really do something that's wrong. And he should have taken time to think about that before he acted. But he did, and he's going there, and he's going to do something that really would be simple. I mean, couldn't God have worked through Abigail to give him an opportunity to maybe re-look at what's going on in his life?
And I think that's what he says afterwards. It's like, thank God that he sent you to me.
God's working in all of this and all of David's life and everybody's life to give opportunities to people to make a good decision and right decision. And sometimes people still just ignore it and go on. And
That's true.
Could have been In fact, she's put herself as a sacrifice almost in front of the rest of the people, which David could have just gone on and said, hey, you're part of it, get rid of her. But instead, he thought and listened to her reasoning, which was right. He made the decision to do the right thing, and looking back, thinking, wow, what could have happened if she hadn't come, or if I had ignored this, I would really regretted what I had done.
Did it surprise him when she did that? I mean, just kind
I-
of just stopped.
Oh, when you think about when his heart just kind of fell, I want to say yes, but another part of me wants to say he didn't realize how much he did. But I think it was because of how much was at stake that he didn't realize was about to be taken away because of his foolishness.
Are you talking about Nabal?
Yeah, Nabal. Yeah.
I was talking about David.
Well, yeah. She was asking a different question, but yeah. With David, he was getting emotional, but I think bringing it to Nabal's attention, he realized, oh, that was bad. Oh, okay, never mind, sorry.
They all just stopped.
Well,
She
you
got
see,
off.
but you see a woman coming in.
I mean, if she just fell, I'm sure they would have gone, well, would they have helped her? I don't know.
I would have felt to be struck down a woman, unarmed woman coming with a bunch of goods. I mean, that's got to make you kind of reevaluate what you think.
Well, there's another dimension to her love here. We would say, hands down, in a relationship, a man and a woman, the man should be the one to go up to bat for his family to protect them. Regardless of his pride and his honor and all that, he wants to do what's genuinely right. That's what we would hope every husband would want. In this case, the husband didn't realize the detriment of the effect of his actions. And the wife, who knew more about what was the right way, well, actually, I don't even know if the word knew more. I think it was just his arrogancy, as you were talking about. It took the wife to go to bat on behalf of the husband, saying, look, my husband is a fool. He should be the one who should have given you these things, but because I care about not just his life, but everybody else, I'm here on behalf of you. I wonder if we would still go to bat for our spouses or our friends or anybody else if they were to turn down an opportunity that would actually protect us and put us more into harm's way because of their actions. If we'd be willing to forgive them and go to bat for them immediately after the fact and say, oh, they did not know what they were doing, just get them another chance. I think what Abigail is really showing is true love. Standing up for people who do you wrong and other people as well. I think that's a powerful thing. How do we deal with those closest to us when they do something catastrophic that could affect our lives? Well, in Abigail's case, she pleaded for their life. It's interesting. Any other comments?
We read about people in their households
Mm-hmm.
a lot. And even in Cornelius, when he was baptized, he in his household and all this. So we see a closeness in households back then in biblical times. So it was almost, they weren't blood kin, but they were households. They had a special relationship within their house.
Yeah, servants were considered part of the household.
Yeah, so she was trying to protect them, but they weren't knowledgeable or responsible for this. She was taking care of those as part of her earthly, not blood, but earthly family.
I think guys were very like one-track minded, and women are able to have like window open, window open, window open, window open, and they can focus on everything at the same time. There's a strength to that, especially in the church. If we had that kind of perspective collectively, it would be a powerful thing. But yeah, that's a good point. Any other thoughts? That was good. Now we're going to pass, for sake of time. We're going to pass over Abigail begs for remembrance, and the idea is God has taught mercy, and I know Nabal was a fool and a crook, but please spare him, spare the servants, spare me. If you don't see it fit to do so, then just start with me. But David is pleased with this, and he says, thank the Lord that he sent you to me. Now, if you look at verse 36, we'll start there in the text. This is after David has received the goods, and we talked about last week the idea of, did Nabal have enough goods to feed David? And was David kind of being intrusive by saying, look, I need these. I protected your shepherds while we were in the fields. Surely you can give this. Now, I want you to look at the multitude of how much Nabal had, and then compare that with why in the world from the beginning did he say no? Because if there's any idea where he's full or he's drunk, that means he has more than enough. So let's see what the text says. Beginning in verse 36, it would say, Now Abigail went to Nabal, and there he was holding a feast in his house like the feast of a king. That's important to remember. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. Therefore she told him nothing, little or much, until morning light. So it was in the morning light, when the wine had gone from Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became like a stone. Then it happened about after 10 days that the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, Blessed be the Lord, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and has kept his servant from evil. For the Lord has returned the wickedness of Nabal on his own head. And David sent and proposed to Abigail to take her as his wife. And when his servants came to David, or when the servants of David had come to Abigail at Carmel, they spoke to her, saying, David sent us to you to ask you to become his wife. Then she arose, bowed her face to the earth, and said, Here is your maidservant, a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. So Abigail rose in haste, and rode on a donkey, attended by 5 of her maidens, and she followed the messengers of David, and became his wife. Okay, so in regards to Nabal's response, any servant could run loose, and Saul has said David's a wicked man, so David must be a wicked man. Who is the son of Jesse? King of a feast. How much food do you think he had? That's on top of what Abigail had already given David and his servants. He had more than enough. He was just being greedy and being selfish. And in fact, Holy Scripture, it gives very accurate descriptions to people. He was just a selfish man. There's no way to get around that. Now, there's something interesting here, and you look at verse 34, we didn't read it. But David would say, "For indeed, as the Lord God of Israel who lives has kept me back from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, surely by morning light, no males would have been left to Nabal." Well, it gives that same phrase, morning light. Abigail did not tell him anything until morning light, and it wasn't until the morning light that the wine went away from intoxicating Nabal. It's one thing to kill a drunk man. It's another thing for a drunk man to be killed because of his drunkenness. When we allow people to fall into the consequences of their actions, meaning life takes its course and you've done this to yourself and there's nothing you can do about this. When we let life do its own thing, then we allow God to do His thing in their life as well. Now, that might involve us interacting with these people. But when we decide to take charge to say, well, I'm going to end your life right now, and I'm not talking about violating laws and capital punishment, things like that. I'm not talking about that. But when we take someone else's life in our own hands and we decide to execute it immediately, that's a problem. Now, what about spiritually speaking? There is a sense where we need to allow consequences to play out in life, but if we see that people are going down the wrong road, sometimes we execute people spiritually immediately in the way that we approach them or handle a situation of trying to lead them to the truth. And just like Abigail, she didn't come back and tell Nabal everything. She waited till the next day when he could actually think and understand fully understand the consequences of his actions. That's very wise. And I think we need to do the same thing. And if you can take the idea of when Nabal was merry and he was intoxicated, well, if someone is in the pleasures of sin, so to speak, Paul would say to Timothy at the end of 1 Timothy chapter 1, Hymenaeus and Alexander, who made shipwreck of the faith, give them over to Satan, that they may return. Did the same thing in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 and chapter 2 when it talks, well, more in chapter 2, where it talks about the man who had been cast out, so to speak, disfellowshipped, because he did take his father's wife. But then after that disfellowshipping, it says, look, we're not ignorant of Satan's devices. Forgive the man. He's paid his time, and he wants to do what's right. Accept him back in. Sometimes we can be overzealous to the extent of, well, you did that. Remember your sins. You did that. And it drives people away. We need to be very cautious about that. Yes?
I don't want to change the subject, but I want to make a footnote here of what you just read about the wine and him being very drunk. That we remember that the next time we have a conversation about wine and drinking, and the people want to say, I've heard it brought up here many times, that the wine that they used back in those days was not alcohol, it was grape juice. And there's an example right there that the wine did contain alcohol.
Oh, absolutely. And the way you'll determine in a text whether or not it's intoxicating or not, typically every time, if it's put in a negative light or someone does get so drunk that they can't think straight, that is most definitely alcoholic wine. When it's referenced to wine in a positive sense, in the sense of blessings of God, that is not alcoholic wine, but it's some kind of beverage that we would try to say, well, that's non-alcoholic. I think wine could have other relations to some kind of juice of the fruit, so to speak, or I guess some kind of equivalent to us would be, well, what if we enjoyed, yeah, I'm not going to get around this. Non-alcoholic, you could use it for that, but it also is in reference to blessings at times. So let context define it, and in this case, yes, definitely alcoholic.
Well, think about it. The Bible speaks of not being taken of much wine.
Mm-hmm.
It tells you not to get drunk. It tells you not to overdo. And it's even a sin to overeat. I just, like I said, I don't want to change your subject and go.
Oh, you're good.
Direction. I just want to
Yeah, that's a really good point. One other thing, and this is about Abigail's character. If you notice her statement, the last statement it makes of her, wouldn't it be great, no matter where we go in life, if our attitude was this: here is your servant, a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. That goes back to John 13. What if we had the attitude of serving others, regardless of what life held for us? We're going to be servants to others for God. That's a powerful statement. And that, as far as I know, that's the last words that we have of Abigail. Beautiful woman, very beautiful in character, how she responds to difficult situations. We can learn a lot from her. Read through this text and think about it a little bit more. There's definitely more than just focusing on Abigail's character, but there's some beautiful things of how we can bring joy to our Father, just like Abigail brought joy to God in helping David and the servants of Nabal. So, thank you for your time, attention, and comments, and we'll be back in about 10 minutes. Oh, you're fine. I understood what you meant.
But I'm agreeing with you. Had that conversation. Did you agree?
Green Bay.
What's hard to get you probably get so full of liquids that you don't want to move anymore.
Are you still coming along?